So who will win the crown for Flying Psychic Enraged Death Machine? Will it be Mephiston or the Librarian Dreadnought? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're always looking to get the best out of our miniatures on the tabletop. We're coming towards the end of our Blood Angels series at the moment, so I thought I'd do a side-by-side comparison of two of the key HQ choices available to the Blood Angels, Mephiston with his new Primaris stat line, and the Librarian Dreadnought, which has always been a solid contender for the Sons of Sanguinius. The reason I think that these guys are quite good to compare side by side is that they have a lot of similarities. They're both Blood Angels Psykers with 2 casts and a short movement unless they unleash Wings of Sanguinius. They're both abnormally durable, have very decent close combat weapons, and I'd argue are probably best employed on the battlefield, using both Wings of Sanguinius and Quickening to move an enormous way up the battlefield, jump over enemy screening units, and get stuck into the enemy tanks or commanders. I went into this review thinking that both of the units would be quite well balanced, but I was interested to know how the maths would actually play out. So what I've done here is compare their damage output against a few likely targets, and their durability against some common weapons, and then listed some of their other advantages and disadvantages that aren't taken into account by the maths. So without further ado, let's get into it, and let's look at their damage output first. So this slide shows their damage output versus some likely targets. I've just done it as the model's base damage output, because they both cost almost exactly the same number of points. The Librarian Dreadnought is 142 and Mephiston is 145, so I didn't bother to do it in terms of damage output per 100 points as I often do. We've assumed that these guys are just charging in against the opponent, so do have the benefit of having Red Thirst. But we've assumed that they're not in the Blood Angels Assault Doctrine for this comparison, because personally I'd quite like to get them stuck in earlier than turn 3 if I could. The results here are reasonably obvious. Firstly, it's clear that Mephiston just wins out against single wound infantry, such as the Guardsman or the Tactical Space Marine. He has more attacks, and it doesn't matter if those attacks are damage D3 rather than damage 3 against these targets, and even though Vitarius, his sword, has a little bit less AP than the Force Halberd of the Libby Dread, that doesn't quite make up the difference on the Tactical Marine. If we look at targets with 2 wounds, such as an Intercessor, then the Librarian Dreadnought just edges it in this case. This is due to Mephiston's sword not killing a Intercessor every single strike, because you've got that chance of rolling a 1 for his damage characteristic. Of course, the Librarian Dreadnought would be even more efficient against targets with 3 or more wounds due to that flat damage 3, and we can see this reflected in his damage output against the vehicles and knights, which interestingly enough, these guys absolutely don't care whether they're hitting a toughness 7 or toughness 8 vehicle, as they're both strength 10. So Mephiston's a bit better against 1 wound infantry. They're about equal against 2 wound targets. Mephiston isn't significantly behind, but the Librarian Dreadnought does handily outperform Mephiston against toughness 7 and 8 vehicles. So they do both have benefits. I'd argue that the Librarian Dreadnought probably wins out in this contest, as I say that these guys most want to be hunting enemy hard targets rather than wading through 1 wound infantry. That's probably best off left to a million bolt shots or Death Company with chainswords in my opinion. But let's move on now and take a look at durability. So in this table we have the number of successful hits needed to down each model. I have done the maths for Mephiston's Feel No Pain with this, but I've assumed that the Librarian Dreadnought hasn't used the Duty Eternal stratagem. But I do think it would often do this if it was isolated and exposed to a lot of return firepower. The results show that both models are really quite close in durability across almost every category, though Mephiston does win out slightly in most, besides particularly against strength 6 weapons, which will be wounding the Librarian Dreadnought on 5s, but Mephiston on 3s, so that's a big difference. The general trend is that the Librarian Dreadnought is stronger at resisting anything at strength 5, 6 or 7, due to being toughness 7, and Mephiston is comparatively stronger at resisting anything with low AP, such as the lasgun or autocannons, due to that very nice 2-up save of his. Against dedicated anti-tank fire, such as overcharged plasma or las cannons, the Librarian Dreadnought is just going to go down quite a lot easier than Mephiston, due to that 2-up armor save. Here I've got the numbers if the Librarian Dreadnought does use Duty Eternal, which is a great stratagem to halve the damage of incoming fire for just 1 command point, and is a great advantage to running the Dreadnought. This one shows that he decently outperforms Mephiston against high strength multi-damage anti-tank weapons, such as the Avenger Gatling Cannon, Autocannon and Overcharged Plasma. The effect wouldn't be quite as pronounced if he was being hit by damage 3 weapons rather than damage 2 weapons, but it would still be a very big boost. So maths overview is that Mephiston is stronger against infantry and the Librarian Dreadnought against tanks, and Mephiston is more durable against most things, unless the Librarian Dreadnought uses Duty Eternal, which will make him harder to remove for dedicated anti-tank weapons. So let's look at the other factors that the maths does not show. So Mephiston's main advantages as I see them are these. Firstly, he's a little bit faster. He has a base movement of 7 rather than the Librarian Dreadnought's 6. He knows slightly more spells, he knows 1 extra power, and he can deny 1 more power per turn. He can deny 2, where the Librarian Dreadnought can only deny 1. I still think that the go-tos are going to be Wings of Sanguinius and Quickening, but this could mean that Mephiston could have Unleash Rage in there too, either to cast on himself or on his battle brothers, once he's got close enough to the enemy and he doesn't need wings for manoeuvrability anymore. He has the infantry keyword, which will let him interact with ruins a lot more easily. He can go straight through ruin bases, even if wings does not go off, and can climb into top floor ruins even if Wings of Sanguinius isn't in effect. The Librarian Dreadnought can do neither of these. Plus also Mephiston's smaller base means that he can fit into gaps that the Librarian Dreadnought sometimes won't be able to, and could maybe get him closer to assassinate characters or fit round a small gap in the enemy lines. The smaller model size also means that it'll be easier to hide Mephiston from enemy shooting compared with the Dreadnought, which is another decent consideration. In terms of shooting, Mephiston has a plasma pistol that will hit on a 2, though I'd personally never think about overcharging this, as you really don't want to lose your Primaris Psychic Death Machine to one overcharged plasma pistol. He also has frag and crack grenades if you need other options for when he's up close. The Librarian Dreadnought has a Storm Bolter on the other hand, which will obviously be much better at longer range with 4 shots at 24 inches per turn, so I think their shooting options are fairly well balanced to be honest. Mephiston also has the Infantry and Primaris keywords, which can be useful for some stratagems. In particular, Honour the Chapter and Transhuman Physiology are really important options that Mephiston has, but the Librarian Dreadnought doesn't. So if you are going very command point heavy, you could have Mephiston fight twice, or spend 2 command points to ensure that heavy anti-tank weapons only wound him on a 4 or worse. This could narrow the gap between the Librarian Dreadnought's durability against anti-tank weapons when the Librarian Dreadnought uses Duty Eternal, but do bear in mind that Transhuman Physiology does cost 2 command points whereas Duty Eternal costs 1, so I think the Duty Eternal is a far better value compared with Transhuman. In terms of the Librarian Dreadnought's advantage, of course it is 3 points cheaper, not that that's going to be a big deal, but it is a small advantage. He has no fixed Warlord traits, which is a lot better than Mephiston, so he isn't locked into taking Soul Warden, which gives him 1 denial. You could give the Librarian Dreadnought Artisan of War to give him +1 damage on that Force Halbart, which would absolutely cut through vehicles and put his base damage far higher than Mephiston's when you are targeting vehicles. From Blood of Baal, he also has the option of the Biomantic Sarcophagus, which is restricted to his use only. This will make him a flatly better Psyker in terms of casting powers than Mephiston, and it's certainly a good option to ensure that Wings and Quickening do go off. He has Smoke Launchers, which is actually a decent durability upgrade. If he's advancing up the board, or even just flinging himself into close combat, being -1 to hit in the next turn, at the expense of his very meagre shooting, could easily make the difference between him living and dying. He's going to be more durable than Mephiston against almost all types of shooting in the turn that he uses those Smoke Launchers, so they're an important one not to forget, if you can live without those Stormbolter shots for a turn. We've already mentioned stratagem somewhat. Duty Eternal is amazing, and is a really solid stratagem that I'd consider using every turn if I thought that one of my Dreadnoughts was in danger. He also has Wisdom of the Ancients as well, which can allow him to reroll 1s, and give him just a 17% damage increase against all targets, and if you're lucky it might well just overlap with other Blood Angels units that are nearby too, helping them out as well. He has the Vehicle and Dreadnought keywords, and all of the advantages and disadvantages that they bring, mainly things like stratagem use or being targeted by certain weapons. One other useful stratagem as well that relies on the vehicle keyword is Armour of Contempt, to give him a 5-up shrug off against mortal wounds. So overall, who is better? I'm afraid to say I'm not honestly sure. I think that both of these guys are really solid, and certainly have their own pros and cons over each other. The Librarian Dreadnought's probably the one that you want to go for if you're looking for pure anti-tank might, particularly if you're happy to spend a command point or so a turn on him to use Duty Eternal. But Mephiston is more durable when there aren't any command points involved. He's better against infantry, and he has a lot of decent advantages in terms of the things that don't appear on the maths. From personal preference, I think I'm a fan of the Librarian Dreadnought a little bit more than Mephiston. The Smoke Launchers and Duty Eternal put him over the edge for me in terms of being a solid pick. and being able to give him both a Warlord trait and the unique relic from Blood of Baal are also powerful options. But I can absolutely see the merits of both. I think they'll both do you very well, and in all honesty I'm not sure it matters quite how much you pick one over the other. In most situations they're likely to do a perfectly adequate job of whichever mission you assign them to. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on which one you prefer down below, and if I've missed any relative advantages of one over the other that you think I should have included. We'll be wrapping up our main coverage of the Blood Angels shortly. I'll be doing a similar side-by-side comparison of 9 different Blood Angels buffing characters and see which one can get us the most bang for our buck out of our assault units, so stay tuned for that. If you've enjoyed this, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for more similar content every day, and consider supporting me on Patreon if you'd like to help out the channel. Thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time.